Good evening, College Trig. Here is our last installment for Chapter 5, graphing tangent and cotangent functions. So when we're first looking at tangent graphs, let's go ahead and think about our unit circle. So remember that tangent is equal to sine over cosine. And technically, we should have our angles here. Okay, so tangent of theta is equal to sine of theta over cosine of theta. So if I went around and wanted to calculate all those values here, I know that at 0, if I did sine over cosine, I would have 0 over 1, which is 0. Okay. If I did it here with pi over 6, my sine is going to be 1/2 over square root of 3 over 2. Dividing by something is the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal, and that's going to be equal to 1 over the square root of 3. And rationalizing my denominator, I get square root of 3 over 3. So what I want you guys to do, go ahead, and I'm going to pause the video and do it myself. Go ahead and find your tangent values for your first two quadrants. So as you went through and filled out your tangents here, notice you get square root of 3 over 3, 1, square root of 3, undefined, negative square root of 3, 1, square root of 3, 3. If you continue this through, this pattern's going to persist. We're going to get square root of 3 over 3. This is going to be 1. This is going to be square root of 3. This is going to be undefined. This is going to be square root of 3 negative. This is going to be negative 1. And this is going to be negative square root of 3 over 3. So what you're noticing, what you should notice is in this one revolution, we're getting a full period. We go from 0 to 0, and we're getting all the positive values and then all the negative values. Then again, all the positive values, all the negative values. So really, for tangent, a period happens at pi. So it's half of what you need for a sine and cosine graph. Well, when we're graphing, we don't typically like to, remember, undefineds are going to be asymptotes. We don't typically like to graph asymptotes in between. So if we went from 0 to pi and we did this graph, we'd have a undefined line right in between our graph. So it's better to go from undefined to undefined. So what we're going to actually want to graph is this interval from pi over 2 to negative pi over 2, so we have a continuous function here. All right, so let's look at what this is going to look like. So on our graphing cheat sheet, we are actually going to start at negative pi over 2 and go to pi. So when we're graphing, we're actually going this direction, keeping it as a counterclockwise fashion. Notice at negative pi over 2, we were undefined. At negative pi over 4, we're negative 1. At 0, we're at 0. At pi over 4, we are going to be 1. And at pi over 2, again, we're undefined. So you can see we're graphing from one asymptote to another asymptote, and then it's a periodic function after that. We can cut and paste from there. So this is what our tangent graph is going to look like. Notice, from negative pi over 2, right here, to pi over 2, we have a continuous graph. We have at 0, we're 0. At positive 1, or at pi over 4, we're 1. At negative pi over 4, we're negative 1. So from there, we can use those key points, knowing that we have asymptotes here, and connect the dots, and we see we get this function here. That function is just cloned over and over, and it's just shifted over by its period. And remember, each period is just pi for tangent of x. So now thinking about cotangent graphs, I'm going to go back to my unit circle and try and build off the idea from the unit circle. So remember, cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent. So if I start flipping these things over, I'm going to write them in green. 0 reciprocated. If you think about it as 0 over 1, when you flip it, it's 1 over 0, or this is undefined. So this is now going to become square root of 3. This is going to be 1. This is the square root of 3 over 3. Now this is 0, and this again is going to be negative square root of 3 over 3. This will stay as 1, and this is going to be negative square root of 3, and this is going to be undefined here. So notice that how this, we can continue this around, but notice we have already established our full period. We went from an asymptote, undefined, to an undefined. So for cotangent, we are going to work on this interval from 0 to pi and graph those key points. So as I put them in the table, I know that at 0, cotangent is undefined. At pi over 4, it was 1. At pi over 2, it was 0. At 3 pi over 4 is negative 1. And at pi, again, it was undefined. So now, if I line those up with my graph, notice what my cotangent graph will look like. So now I'm going to graph it from 0. So my 0 is my asymptote, and my pi is my asymptote. So now as I go over, notice pi over 4, it's 1. At pi over 2, it's 0. At 3 pi over 4, it's negative 1. So I get this graph here representing my function, where these here are just our asymptotes. So this is the function that can be made into my cloner, and I can get the same graph over and over again. Okay, and that is tonight's notes on graphing cotangent and tangent graphs.